All right, everybody, here we go. We are going to do, we're going to go to Introduction of Stuttering Part 2. Um, Here we are, and we'll really be talking here about prevalence. So, how many people currently stutter? What the books are going to tell us is that about 2.5% of all kindergartners stutter, about 1% of school-age kids stutter, less than 1% of adults stutter, maybe about half of 1% of adults stutter. So overall, the number we hear a lot is that about 1% of the population stutters. Now, we had a report recently from Reilly, Onslow, Packman et al. Out of Australia, and they looked at about 1,600 children and their mothers in Australia. This was a sort of a wide-ranging study looking at all kinds of things, not just speech, but all kinds of disorders and quality of life and things like that. And in this sample, about 11% of those kids stuttered by age 4. Predictors were higher maternal education, males were more likely to stutter, and twins were more likely to stutter than um, kids who were not twins. Children who stutter had higher language and cognitive scores and better health-related quality of life, and no other differences. So this is really interesting. And what we can talk about maybe at the end of this is, why would that be? Why might higher maternal education, why might boys, and why might twins be more likely to stutter? And why would higher language cognitive scores cause stuttering? Or at least not cause stuttering, but maybe be more likely to lead to stuttering. All right, so that was prevalence. Prevalence is how many people stutter right now. Incidence is how many people will ever stutter at some point in their lives. And around 5% of people will say that at some point in their lives they used to stutter or something like that. So this could be people who stuttered and recovered from stuttering. One thing we'll learn is that about 80% of kids who start to stutter will recover from stuttering. And this can also be older people who have had, let's say, a traumatic brain injury, a car accident, and they started to stutter, who have had a stroke and started to stutter, who had a tumor and started to stutter, and either they've continued to stutter or the stuttering has fallen away. But about 5% of people will say, at some time in my life, I stuttered. All right, gender differences. About 4 times as many males stutter as females across the world. It's almost equal before age 2, and then about age 4, it's about 2-to-1 males to females. And then for adults, it can be 5-to-1 males to females. It can also be, I've even seen 7-to-1 males to females as adults. And these are pretty similar sex ratios as are found in dyslexia, Tourette's, Down syndrome, autism, all of which have a neurological basis. And, why would the girls and boys be almost equal, before that second birthday? Well, children almost never stutter on the first word. It's when we get word combinations, we get sentences, and you hit a point where children hit this threshold of, I'm no longer able to be fluent. I can be fluent at the 1-word level. Maybe I can be fluent at the 2-word level, but my little speech motor system is going to break down any further than that. And females are going to be more likely to get there faster. So before age 2, the boys might still be at the 1- and 2-word levels, whereas a 2-year-old little girl might be putting phrases together, might have sentences. So she's going to be more likely to start stuttering earlier than our boys. Now, girls are also more likely to recover from stuttering than our boys. So not only will boys start later, but they're going to be less likely to recover from stuttering. So the older kids get, the more likely it is to be a boy who stutters than a girl. Genetics, about 70% of children who stutter have a stuttering relative. About 25% of those have a parent who stutters, usually a father, right? Because males are going to stutter more often than females. And in one of the famous twin studies of kids who stuttered, stuttering was shared by 63% of identical twins, but only by 19% of fraternal twins. So if we looked at identical twins where one stuttered, there was a 63% chance that the other child stuttered. But if we've got fraternal twins where one stuttered, there was only a 19% chance that the other child stuttered, right? So identical twins share much more of that genetic makeup than do fraternal twins. So it's only natural that, you know, your twin's going to be more likely to stutter if you stutter or to not stutter if you don't stutter. Now, also, right, that number's not, 99%. Nothing in genetics is 100%. But if we have an identical twin, that number should be 98%, 99%, but it's not. So we know there are other factors besides genetics that cause stuttering. All right. And we'll talk about this later in another time. Concomitant disorders. Depending on the study, 24 to 45% of children who stutter often also have a phonological disorder. And that depends how we define stuttering, how we define a phonological disorder, how old the kids were. So there's a lot of variability, but that number is certainly a lot higher than the average population. And the kids who stutter are also more likely to have, kids who stutter who have a phonological disorder are less likely to recover from stuttering than are kids who stutter who have normal or above average phonological skills, right? So these are the kids that are going to be more at risk to continue stuttering if they also have a phonological disorder. Things are kind of messy for language disorders. Kids who stutter on average may have higher language scores than children who do not. Um, but yet at the same time, kids who stutter are going to be more likely to also have a language disorder than kids who don't stutter. So they seem to be at, either higher than average or lower than average. And kids who recover from stuttering may be those kids on the higher end of the language scores, whereas those kids who continue to stutter might be more likely to be on the lower end of language ability. And that makes sense, right? That if you have a lot of language ability, that's going to put a lot of stress on your little speech motor system. And you might, if you've got a little bit of genetic or some other reason for stuttering, you're going to be more likely to start stuttering. But those kids with higher language skills may be able to find a way around that stuttering glitch, whereas kids with lower language skills who then take longer with word finding, take longer with putting sentences together, it's going to make everything harder, they're going to be more likely to keep stuttering. All right. Now, so that's kind of a genetic, those are kind of internal factors that are going to lead to stuttering or to maybe more stuttering. What are factors that once you've started stuttering are going to be the reason why there's more or less stuttering? Longer words are going to be stuttered on more than shorter words, right? So anything that makes talking harder is going to increase stuttering. Most stuttering occurs in the initial position of words, and frequently used words are stuttered less often than are less frequently used words. So if I used a word all the time, like the, is, a, and those are going to be less likely to be stuttered than words I don't say nearly as often. So the less I use a word, right, the longer it's going to take me to retrieve that word in my lexicon, the less, I've outputted that word, the less I've, have kind of the phonological coding for that word, the more likely I'm going to stutter. Whereas if it's a word I say all the time, I can find it quickly, I've got the phonological coding for it, and it's a lot easier to get out. This leads to, right, adults are going to stutter more on those open category words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, those words that there are, are millions of choices, right, for. There are millions of nouns, millions of verbs that we've got to pick from and say. Whereas kids are going to stutter more on closed category words, the pronouns, the conjunctions, the prepositions, right? Well, why is that? Well, kids, especially when they're young, right, they're going to start saying nouns and verbs, and that's what they're going to say. They're not going to say the other things. They're not going to say pronouns, prepositions, conjunctions nearly as much. Those start to come along a little bit later, right? So whereas an adult might say the word the 1,000 times a day, if not more, at a 2-year-old might not say the at all. They're going to just say nouns and verbs and phrases and never say the. So when they do say it, they might be more likely to stutter on it. All right, so this is a sort of frequency of use issue. All right, some key terms and terms that might be likely to show up on the praxis. Anticipation. Many stutterers can predict which words they're going to stutter on. So if I hand somebody who stutters a piece of paper with a paragraph and say, I want you to read this silently, I want you to circle all the words you think you're going to stutter on, they're going to do that. They'll hand me back the piece of paper. I'll hand them a new piece of paper with the same paragraph, but not their circles on it. They're going to be right. The words they stutter on are going to be more likely to be ones that they predicted they'd stutter on. We also have consistency. So when people who stutter read a passage several times, they'll stutter on many of the same words each time. So if I say, great job reading that passage, read it again, read it again, read it again. Maybe I have them read that same passage several times. All in all, they're going to stutter on the same words each time. It's not going to be random all over the place. And then we've got adaptation as the third idea. When people who stutter read a passage several times, they'll stutter less often each time. Right, so the first time they read a passage, they stuttered 20 times. I give them the same passage again, they stutter 12 times. I give it to them a third time, they stutter 10 times. A fourth time, they stutter 8 times. A fifth time, they stutter 7 times. And then maybe they flatten out there and they stutter 7, 8, 9, 7, 6, 7, 8, forever. So we're going to stop there. So each time they stutter, so each time they read it, they stuttered less. But those 7 times that they stuttered on, let's say 6 of those 7 were among the 20 words they stuttered on the first time. So even though they stutter less times they adapt, they're still consistent in that the 8 words I stuttered on here, 7 of those 8 were among the 20 I stuttered on here, right? So I'm consistent, but I'm also adapting, as I go, and that makes sense, right? The more you read a passage, the easier it becomes. So anything that makes talking easier, you're going to have less moments of stuttering. Anything that makes talking harder, in general, you're going to have more moments of stuttering. Whether that's harder from a language standpoint, harder from a speech standpoint, harder from an emotional standpoint, harder from a cognitive standpoint, you're going to have more stuttering. All right, so this takes us to some fluency-inducing conditions. We've got speaking when alone, right? So if you're talking to yourself, you're going to have a lot less stuttering. Why? Well, we've got lots of reasons, right? One is that there's no one to judge you, right? There's no one there but yourself. No one's going to be judging your stuttering. So that's one thing. But also when you're speaking when alone, you actually talk more slowly, You also obviously are talking about things that you know about, right? You're usually talking about what you have to do today, or you're going to tell a story that happened to you. So if if someone asks you, I want you to talk to yourself, tell a story, I'm going to leave the room, it's just you in there. So you'll talk about something you know about. Also, there's not going to be a lot of back and forth, right? So hopefully when you're alone, it's only you talking. Your other personality is not going to be arguing with you or having conversation. But if I'm in conversational speech, right? I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk, I talk, you talk. That's very difficult from just a speech motor standpoint. But if I'm by myself, I'm just there talking. It's easier to talk. Um, because I'm by myself. So I get to choose the topic. I get to talk about what I know about. No one's interrupting me. Right? It makes everything much more simple. So people often think about the judgment aspect, but they don't think about how much simpler it is from a cognitive standpoint, a language standpoint, a speech standpoint. All right. This is really similar to why speaking to an animal or infant is easier. Um, it's kind of the same thing as when being alone, but also we get the mother-ese impact here as well. All right. And those people in speech and language know that mother-ese means the way a mother speaks to a child. And fathers do this as well. Right, so you're going to use a slower rate of speech, you're going to use more changes in pitch, you're going to use shorter sentences, shorter words, simpler words, more common words, right? So if I'm talking to a 1-year-old, look at the ball, where's the ball? There's the ball, there it is, good job, throw me the ball, right? So simple, easy. There's kind of a sing-songy effect. So we've got rhythm, we've got simplicity, right? All these things are going to add up to being more fluent. Speaking in unison with another speaker. All right. So if um, let's say someone's reading at church and they're reading a psalm or a paragraph and everyone's reading it together, suddenly kids who stutter find out, wow, I'm fluent when everybody else is reading at the same time. All right. Now, what people used to think was that was because everyone else was carrying sort of the importance of the message, right? You're just kind of tagging along. It's not important whether you talk or not, so that's why you're fluent. We've since found out that that's not what it is. So if we record, let's say we record somebody reading a passage, and then I put headsets on somebody who's going to read the same passage in front of 100 people. That person just hearing that passage being read and linking onto that in unison, speaking together, all of a sudden they're just as fluent as if that person was speaking next to them. So they're still carrying that message to those 100 people all by themselves, but they're really fluent. We're not entirely sure why that is, but and let's actually jump down now to listening to delayed auditory feedback. I should put those two next to each other. So with delayed auditory feedback, that is when I can hear myself talking in my ear. So delayed auditory feedback, you either have headphones on or you have a hearing aid in your ear, and I can actually hear myself speaking, and it's delayed a little bit, but I get that feedback that I would be getting if I was talking, in unison with everybody. And so at least in the short term, delayed auditory feedback makes people really fluent. We don't know completely why, except feedback is really helpful. So feedback's going to make it easier, right? And anything that makes it easier, if I get strong auditory feedback, strong visual feedback, strong any feedback, I'm going to stutter less. Also, right, when I hear my self, it's going to slow me way down. Speaking slowly by itself is going to be very fluency enhancing as well. So there are lots of reasons why delayed auditory feedback might increase fluency. We don't fully understand it, but speaking slowly is part of that. Right? The last thing is going to be singing, right? A lot of people who stutter find that singing is fluency enhancing. So, and then again, there are lots of reasons why. Number one, singing comes from a different part of the brain. So singing is very right brain driven, whereas speech and conversational speech is very left brain driven. So singing actually takes a completely different pathway. It's driven by the rhythm and the prosody of the right hemisphere, starts there, and then goes through wherever it goes. Whereas conversational speech starts with the language centers in the left hemisphere and goes wherever it goes. So a lot of people believe that singing helps you completely bypass whatever that neurological glitch is. Okay. Now, also, when you sing, you're saying each syllable more slowly. Usually things are memorized. Usually the speech is fairly simple. Your breathing is different, right? So think of all the things that are different with speaking. Your prosody. So singing and speaking are very different, and it's kind of no accident then that you have a lot less stuttering when you're singing. There are some people who stutter who are completely fluent when they sing. Other people who just stutter less when they sing. Now, right, do we want people who stutter to go around singing all the time? No, right? Because that's even weirder than stuttering. So if you have somebody who's a really good singer and has a background in singing, and I'm going to see them in therapy, right, we might talk about singing. We might have them sing a little bit, maybe to get some carryover, but for the average person, singing is often minimally helpful in therapy. All right, so stuttering is, so we talked about what stuttering is not. Stuttering is not the opposite of fluency, right? So people who stutter have a lot of moments of stuttering. People who stutter have a lot of moments of fluency. Someone who stutters on 20% of their words will often be categorized as a severe stutterer, but that means they're fluent on 80% of their words, right? Also, people that are fluent have a lot of disfluencies, so it's not the opposite. It's more of a continuum, and that stuttering is just part of fluency, just being a little bit different. All right, stuttering is also not a language disorder. People who stutter know exactly what they want to say. They just have a hard time getting it out. Now, people who stutter can have a language disorder, and people who have a language disorder are more likely to stutter, but those are two different things. Stuttering is not a voice disorder. There's nothing physically wrong with people who stutter. Again, people who stutter can have a voice disorder. Sometimes people who stutter can push so hard with their vocal folds that they could possibly even develop a voice disorder if, they don't start relaxing their vocal folds while they speak. But again, there's nothing wrong with the vocal folds of people who stutter. And then stuttering is also not disfluency, right? So everybody is disfluent. People who stutter have typical disfluencies, ums and uhs, revisions, word or phrase repetitions, but stuttering is categorically different from disfluency. So sometimes people will say, well, everybody stutters. No, not everybody stutters. Everybody's disfluent. It's only the really cool, awesome people who get to say that they stutter, not people that are just normally typically disfluent. All right, there we go. That's the end of the show and the end of this presentation.